Deep in the obsidian blackness of the outer void, where the sun is nothing more than a bright, cold star, a ghost is traveling. It has no pilot, it has no engine, it has no voice. It is a small, gold-plated machine, frozen to nearly absolute zero, drifting at 27,000 miles per hour through a silence that has lasted for eons. It carries a message, a golden map, meant for eyes that do not yet exist, sent by a civilization that may be long gone by the time it is found. Tonight the story leaves the Earth behind. This is the chronicle of Pioneer 10, the longest, loneliest journey ever attempted. The story of the last message begins in a place of profound earthly silence, long before it reaches the silence of the stars. It was the deep, motionless middle of the night on January 22, 2003. The location was the Robelo Deep Space Communications Complex, a lonely outpost of humanity situated among the dry, rolling hills west of Madrid, Spain. The Spanish winter night was clear and razor-sharp, the air thin and smelling of coal dust, pine resin, and the ancient cooling granite of the desert floor. Above the sky was a crushing canopy of black, scattered with the cold, unblinking diamond dust of the Milky Way, a spectacle that had looked down on this landscape since before humans walked the earth. Dominated by the starlight, a massive structure rose from the shadows of the scrubland. It was DSS-3, a dish antenna 70 meters wide, a white bowl of steel and aluminum weighing nearly 8,000 tons. It stood like a monument to human curiosity, a cathedral ear turned towards the heavens. Despite its colossal mass, it moved with the grace of a clock mechanism. It was rotating, slowly, imperceptibly, angling its giant neck upward toward the darkest, emptiest region of the constellation Taurus. The movement was so smooth that it made no noise, save for a deep subsonic vibration of the massive gears turning in their oil baths, a thrum felt in the soles of the feet rather than heard with the ears. Inside the control room, the atmosphere was a sealed capsule of focus. The thick concrete walls held back the wind and the silence of the desert. The air inside was recycled, filtered, cool, and carried the specific sterile scent of ozone from the server racks mixed with the bitter, dark aroma of coffee that had been sitting in the pot for hours. The lighting was dimmed to a soft amber glow to protect the eyes of the operators from the glare of the monitors, creating an environment that felt existing outside of time, separate from the day and night cycle of the planet. The operator on duty sat in a worn leather chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes locked onto the telemetry screen. He was the modern guardian of a journey that began before he was born. Rows of numbers cascaded down the monitor like digital waterfalls, green against black. He was looking for a specific frequency in the radio spectrum, searching for a needle in a haystack made of cosmic background radiation. He was keeping a vigil for a ghost. The signal he was hunting had been traveling through the void for 11 hours and 20 minutes. It was moving at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. But the distance was so vast that even light, the fastest thing in the universe, grew tired. The signal was weak. It possessed the power of a billionth of a trillionth of a watt. To understand this weakness is to touch the edge of madness. The energy of a single snowflake landing gently on the frozen ground outside contained more force than the signal trying to reach this dish. It was a whisper trying to be heard in a hurricane. It was the voice of Pioneer 10, a small gold-plated machine that had left the Earth when the world was a different place. It was now 7.6 billion miles away, floating in the absolute zero of the outer heliosphere, slowly freezing, slowly dying. It was the most solitary object ever made by human hands. The screen showed a flat green line, static, the sound of the universe hissing at itself, the thermal noise of stars, the magnetic screens of Jupiter, the echo of the Big Bang. The operator adjusted the gain. He narrowed the bandwidth, filtering out the chaos of the galaxy to listen for one specific, artificial heartbeat. He waited. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the room, a white noise blanket that absorbed the passing minutes. And then, the line rippled. A tiny, barely visible spike rose from the floor of the noise. It wavered, almost disappearing, then steadied. A pulse. Thump, thump. The machine was alive. Against all odds, against the freezing cold, against the decay of its own nuclear heart, Pioneer 10 was still speaking. To understand the weight of this final whisper, one must leave the silence of the Spanish desert. One must travel back in time, unwinding the clock by 30 years. One must return to a world of noise, heat, and fire. One must witness the birth of the machine. The date was March 2nd, 1972. The place was Cape Canaveral, Florida. The atmosphere here was heavy, pressing down on the skin. The air was thick with humidity, smelling of salt spray from the Atlantic Ocean, damp marsh grass, and the sharp chemical tang of kerosene and liquid oxygen. The sky was a bruised purple-gray, hanging low over the launch pad. Storm clouds were gathering, torn by high-altitude winds that whipped the flags and rattled the chain-link fences. It was a day that felt electric, charged with the tension of an impending storm. On Launch Complex 36A, the vehicle stood gleaming white against the dark sky. It was the Atlas Centaur, a 90-foot-tall skyscraper of aluminum and explosives. It was a beast designed for brute force. The rocket seemed to be breathing. Ice crystals formed on its flanks as the supercooled liquid oxygen fuel boiled off inside the tanks, venting great plumes of white steam that drifted lazily in the humid breeze. The metal groaned and creaked as the extreme cold of the fuel contracted the skin of the rocket. Hidden inside the aerodynamic nose cone perched high above the ground, Pioneer 10 sat in the dark. It did not look like the sleek spaceships of fiction. It looked industrial. It was a machine built for function, not beauty. Its body was a six-sided hexagon made of aluminum honeycomb, the size of a large trunk. It was wrapped in blankets of multi-layered gold foil insulation, making it glitter like a jewel in the harsh work lights of the gantry. Extending from its body were three long booms, forming a triangle. Two held scientific instruments, sensors to taste the solar wind, eyes to look at the stars. The third boom held its heart. Four radioisotope thermoelectric generators, RTGs. These were not solar panels. Pioneer was going where the sun is just a star. These were nuclear batteries, filled with pellets of plutonium. The plutonium was red-hot, decaying, releasing heat that was converted into electricity. Even sitting on the launch pad, the ship was warm to the touch, a living thing generating its own heat in the cold. It was a creature of fire wrapped in gold, waiting to be released. The countdown entered its final phase. The gantry arms retracted. The rocket stood alone, a white needle aimed at the clouds. Inside the blockhouse, the launch director watched the wind monitors. The weather was marginal. The winds were shearing the upper atmosphere, but the window was open. The command was given, T-10 seconds. The internal power systems of the Atlas rocket hummed to life. Valves opened. Fuel began to flow. The beast was waking up. 5, 4, 3, ignition. The sound that followed was not merely heard, it was felt. It hit the chests of the spectators miles away like a physical blow, a wall of pressure that vibrated the rib cages and rattled the windows of cars parked along the causeway. The base of the rocket erupted in a blinding yellow-white fury. A cloud of smoke and steam, illuminated from within by the fire, engulfed the pad. The clamps released. The Atlas Centaur did not leap. It rose with a majestic, terrifying slowness. It balanced on a pillar of fire, fighting the gravity of the Earth with millions of pounds of thrust. The sound was a continuous tearing roar, as if the sky itself was being ripped open. It was the sound of raw power, of thousands of gallons of fuel being consumed every second to push a small gold box away from the only home it had ever known. But this launch was different from the Apollo missions that had captivated the world. Apollo was heavy and slow. Pioneer was a bullet. As the rocket cleared the tower, it began to pitch over, aiming for a precise keyhole in the sky. It punched through the cloud layer, leaving a glowing hole in the gray ceiling, ascending into the sunlight that lay above the storm. Minutes later, the first stage dropped away. The Centaur upper stage ignited, and then a third stage, a solid rocket motor attached directly to the spacecraft, kicked in. This was the sprint. The acceleration was brutal. The G-forces crushed the tiny spacecraft, pressing its delicate components down with crushing weight. Pioneer 10 screamed through the atmosphere, shedding its metal skin, shedding its connection to the ground. It became the fastest object ever made by human hands up to that moment. It reached a speed of 32,000 miles per hour. It was moving so fast that it crossed the orbit of the Moon in just 11 hours. A journey that took the Apollo astronauts 3 long days of travel was reduced to a morning commute. Pioneer passed the gray, cratered face of the Moon as a blur. It did not stop. It did not orbit. It did not look back. It was running away from home, breaking the chains of Earth's gravity forever. The violent shaking of the launch faded. The roar of the engines died into the vacuum. The final stage separated, and small thrusters fired, hissing softly in the silence, to spin the spacecraft up. Pioneer 10 began to rotate. At 4.8 revolutions per minute, the ship became a gyroscope. This spin was vital. It stabilized the ship without the need for complex computers. It kept the large 9-foot dish antenna pointed religiously, faithfully, back at the receding blue star that was Earth. The ship was now alone. The Earth shrank. It went from a world that filled the sky to a blue ball, to a marble, and finally to a bright star. The silence of the interplanetary void settled around the hull. This was not a quiet room. It was a silence so absolute that it had texture. It was a vacuum where sound waves could not travel. The only noise was the internal vibration of the ship itself. The hum of the transformers, the click of the instruments, the thermal creaking of the gold foil as the sun grew smaller and weaker. The ship was a tiny island of warmth and logic in an infinite ocean of nothingness. Pioneer 10 was entering the forbidden zone. Between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter lay the Asteroid Belt. In 1972, this region was a map of fear. Scientists and writers had imagined it as a dense field of tumbling rocks, a grinder that would shred any ship attempting to pass. There was a genuine fear in the control center in California that the mission would end here, that the signal would simply stop, cut off by a collision with a rock. The engineers held their breath for months, waiting for an impact that the math said was probable. The ship entered the belt. The tension on Earth lasted for weeks. That Pioneer saw nothing. The sensors spun, looking for dust, but the asteroid belt was not a wall. It was a desert. The asteroids were lonely mountains, separated by millions of miles of nothingness. The ship drifted through the dark, untouched. The vastness of space was its shield. It sailed on, falling outward, falling toward the king. 18 months after launch, the darkness of the forward sensors was broken by a new light, Jupiter. Until this moment, Jupiter had been a wandering star to human eyes, or a blurry striped disk in the eyepiece of a telescope. No machine had ever dared to approach it. It was a planet of terrifying superlatives, massive enough to swallow 1,300 Earths, spinning so fast that it bulged at the equator. But its true weapon was invisible. Jupiter possessed a magnetic field of monstrous proportions, a trap that caught particles from the solar wind and whipped them up to near-light speed. It created belts of radiation millions of times more intense than anything near Earth. It was an electrical storm the size of a solar system. As Pioneer 10 approached in December 1973, the ship began to scream. The radiation counters on board, which had clicked lazily during the cruise, began to buzz. Click, 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 then faster. A continuous wall of sound in the headphones of the engineers. The radiation was an invisible hurricane. Subatomic bullets, protons and electrons, tore through the aluminum skin of the spacecraft. They slammed into the delicate silicon of the transistors. They ionized the wires. In mission control, the telemetry screens flickered. The data became garbled. The radiation was cooking the ship's brain. "We are losing the stellar reference," a voice called out in the control room. The star sensor, the eye used to navigate, was being blinded. The radiation caused the sensor to sparkle with false signals. Pioneer 10 thought the entire universe was made of stars. It began to wobble. It was flying blind into the storm. But the machine was tough. It was built with the rugged, simple electronics of the 1970s. It shook, it glitched, but it held the line. It kept its antenna pointed home through the chaos. It dived toward the giant. Gravity grabbed the ship, accelerating it to screaming speeds over 80,000 miles per hour. It skimmed the cloud tops, just 81,000 miles above the swirling ammonia storms. And then the images came down, line by line, pixel by pixel. The photopolarimeter built a picture on the screens in California. The great red spot appeared. It was not a smudge. It was an eye. A storm larger than 2 Earths, staring back at the little robot. The engineers saw the turbulence, the violent beauty of the cloud bands, the colors of ochre, white, and burnt orange. For the first time in history, Jupiter was a place, a world of violent majesty. But Pioneer could not stay. It was a visitor passing in the night. It used Jupiter's massive gravity as a slingshot. It stole momentum from the giant. The planet grabbed the tiny ship, swung it around its backside, and flung it outward with incredible force. The speed was dizzying. Pioneer 10 achieved escape velocity. It was no longer bound to the sun. The gravity that held the planets in their orbits could no longer hold the golden insect. It was leaving the solar system. As Jupiter recedes behind it, shrinking from a giant world back into a bright star, the excitement of the encounter faded. The flashbulbs stopped popping. The headlines changed. Pioneer 10 entered the long twilight. The sun was now far away, small and cold. The ship was traveling into the interstellar dark, heading for a destination it would not reach for 2 million years. And as it drifted into the silence, it carried something on its side. A message, a golden plaque, etched with lines and figures shining in the darkness, waiting for eyes that might not yet exist. This gold shines in the darkness, a beacon of hope bolted to the side of a machine that is slowly freezing. It is our hello. It is our handshake. It is the beginning of the long silence. The machine had survived the fire of the launch. It had survived the rocky gauntlet of the asteroid belt. It had survived the invisible, radioactive hurricane of Jupiter. And now, having been flung outward by the gravity of the giant king, Pioneer 10 entered a new, terrifying and beautiful phase of existence. The violent shaking and the screaming radiation counters were gone. The mission was no longer a sprint. It was a marathon through the void. It was no longer a scout exploring the neighborhood. It was becoming a ghost, drifting into the deep, quiet history of the solar system. But it did not travel alone. Bolted to the aluminum frame of the spacecraft, hidden beneath the shadow of the large dish antenna, protected from the erosion of micrometeoroids by the ship's own body, was a message. To understand the soul of this machine, one must focus entirely on this object. It was a rectangular plate, 6 inches high and 9 inches wide. It was made of 6061 T6 gold anodized aluminum. In the absolute darkness of interstellar space, if a stray beam of starlight were to hit it, it would shine with a warm yellow luster, a piece of earthly jewelry hanging in the infinite cold. This was the Pioneer plaque. It was the first physical message ever sent by humanity to the stars. It was a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean, corked tight, containing the essence of the civilization that built it. The story of this object was as fascinating and complex as the ship itself. It was born not in a sterile laboratory, but in the warm intellectual atmosphere of a dinner party in 1971, mere months before the launch. 3 visionaries: Carl Sagan, the astronomer and poet of science; Frank Drake, the father of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence; and Linda Salzman Sagan, an artist, sat together and realized something profound. They realized that this machine, Pioneer 10, would be the first object in human history to achieve escape velocity from the Sun. It was not coming back. It would not orbit the Sun like a planet or a comet. It would break the chains of gravity completely. It would wander the galaxy forever. It would outlast the United States. It would outlast the pyramids. It would outlast the tectonic shape of the continents. It might even outlast the Earth itself. They realized that millions, perhaps billions of years from now, when Earth is dust and our cities are memories, this golden insect might drift into the reach of another civilization. It needed to say something. It needed to introduce its creators. It needed to be an ambassador from a world that might no longer exist. They had only 3 weeks to design it before the launch. 3 weeks to condense the entire history, location, biology, and philosophy of the human race into a single, static image etched into metal. The result was a poem of science. To the untrained eye, the etchings on the gold plate looked like random lines and stick figures, but to a physicist, human or alien, they were a language of precise, universal information. In the upper left corner, there was a drawing of 2 circles. This was the Rosetta Stone of the message. It was the key to the cipher. It represented the most common element in the universe, hydrogen. Specifically, it showed a single hydrogen atom undergoing a very specific physical process called a hyperfine transition. The drawing showed a proton and an electron. In one circle, their spins were parallel. In the other, they were anti-parallel. When the electron flips its spin state, a quantum event that happens naturally, the atom releases a tiny photon of energy. This photon is a radio wave. Why was this etched here? Because hydrogen is the same everywhere. In the Andromeda Galaxy, in the Orion Nebula, and here on Earth, a hydrogen atom sings the exact same song. This radio wave has a precise wavelength of 21 centimeters. It has a precise frequency of 1420 megahertz. By defining this fundamental unit of length, 21 centimeters, and time, the frequency of the transition, the plaque gave the alien finder a universal ruler and a universal stopwatch. It said, "We know the rhythm of the atom. Use this rhythm to measure everything else on this drawing." It was a brilliant act of scientific communication. establishing a common ground based on the fabric of reality itself. Below this atomic key, dominating the left side of the plaque, was a starburst pattern. 15 lines radiating from a single center point. This was the map, but it was not a map of space as humans knew it, using constellations that shift and change over time. It was a map of time. These lines pointed to pulsars. Pulsars are the lighthouses of the universe. They are the crushed cores of dead stars, spinning wildly in the dark, emitting beams of radio waves that sweep across the sky like the beam of a lighthouse. Some spin fast, hundreds of times a second. Some spin slow, but each one has a unique, fingerprint-like frequency. Etched into each of the 14 lines was a long binary string. This code, translated using the hydrogen key, told the alien the precise frequency of that specific pulsar at the moment the ship was launched. This was profound, because pulsars are not eternal. They lose energy. A pulsar that spins at 100 times a second today might spin at 99 times a second in 10 million years. If an alien found this ship a billion years in the future, they could look at the pulsars in the sky, measure how much they had slowed down compared to the numbers etched on the gold plate, and calculate exactly to the year when this ship left its home. This starburst was not just a map of where the ship came from. It was a map of when it came from. It fixed Pioneer 10 in the river of time. It was a timestamp for eternity. And then there were the fins. On the right side of the plaque, standing in front of a silhouette of the spacecraft to provide scale, were two human beings, a man and a woman. They were naked. This decision sparked controversy on Earth, but it was scientifically necessary. To show humans in suits or dresses would be a lie. It would confuse the biology. Are the clothes part of the body? Is the zipper a scar? We are not born wearing clothes. To be honest with the cosmos, humanity had to be vulnerable. The man raised his right hand, palm open. To a human, this was a greeting, a wave. Hello. But it was also a demonstration of it. It showed that the limb could move independently. It showed 5 fingers. Crucially, it showed the opposable thumb, the tool that allowed the species to hold the hammer, the pen, and the soldering iron. The thumb that built the machine carrying the picture. The woman stood relaxed. Her weight shifted to one leg, showing the range of human posture. Her eyes were large and forward-facing, indicating that the species were predators, or at least hunters, who relied on depth perception. They looked incredibly vulnerable. In the cold vacuum, surrounded by the hard angles of the machine and the mathematical precision of the map, these soft, water-filled organic figures looked fragile. They were a testament to the strange irony of space exploration, that soft creatures made of blood and bone could build a shell of metal capable of surviving the fires of creation. Below them, at the very bottom of the plate, was the address, a diagram of the solar system, the Sun and 9 planets. A line traced the path of Pioneer 10, rising from the 3rd planet, Earth swinging past the massive 5th planet, Jupiter, and flying off into the void. It was a message of peace. It carried no weapons. It carried no coordinates, it simply said, "We were here, we were curious, we built this, and we sent it to you." As Pioneer 10 sailed away from Jupiter, this golden plaque grew cold. Its temperature dropped to near absolute zero, but it remained bright, a silent shout into the darkness, waiting for eyes that might not exist for another billion years. The timeline moved forward. The excitement of the Jupiter encounter faded into history. The year became 1974, then 1976. Time began to blur for the spacecraft. The dramatic events were over. There were no more giant planets to fly. The mission profile for Pioneer 10 did not include Saturn, Uranus, or Neptune. Its trajectory took it away from the other planets, traveling alone on the opposite side of the solar system, heading towards the tail of the heliosphere. The journey became a long twilight. Let us imagine the view from the spacecraft's spin. Every 10 seconds, the ship rotated. The stars streaked by. The sun was behind it, shrinking every day. When it left Earth, the sun was a blinding, burning ball of fire that filled the sky with heat. By the time it passed Jupiter, the sun was 1/25 as bright. Now, as it crossed the orbit of Saturn in 1976, the sun was just a very bright point of light. It looked like a welder's spark in a dark room. It still cast shadows, but they were sharp, black, and utterly cold. The warmth was gone. The ship was entering the deep freeze of the outer solar system. The internal temperature of the spacecraft began to drop. The engineers in California watched the thermal sensors closely. Pioneer 10 was designed to operate in the warmth of the inner solar system and the moderate cold of Jupiter. It was not designed for the interstellar deep freeze where temperatures dropped to nearly absolute zero, -459 degrees Fahrenheit. To keep the fuel lines from freezing solid, to keep the battery chemicals from cracking, the ship relied entirely on the heat from its RTGs, the nuclear generators. But plutonium is a fickle fuel. It follows the immutable laws of every year the plutonium decayed a little more. Every year the heat output dropped. Every year the electricity generated by the thermocouples faded. The fire was burning down. In 1972, at launch, the generators produced 165 watts of power. That was enough to light a couple of bright light bulbs. By 1976, it dropped to 140 watts. By 1980, it dropped to 120 watts. The ship was starving. It was a slow, agonizing starvation. This created a slow motion crisis that would last for decades. The engineers on Earth, the caretakers of this distant traveler, had to make difficult choices. They began a process of triage. They had to decide which parts of the ship were allowed to live and which parts had to die to save the whole. To keep the heart beating, they had to sacrifice the senses. One by one, instruments were turned off. First, the asteroid/meteoroid detector was powered down. The ship stopped feeling the dust that hit its hull. It became numb to the physical touch of the cosmos. Next, the infrared radiometer. Click. Off. The ship could no longer feel the temperature of the stars or the planets. It lost its sense of heat. Then, the imaging photopolarimeter. The camera. This was the hardest loss. The eye that saw the great red spot, the eye that looked back at Earth and saw it shrink to a blue dot, was squeezed shut. There was not enough power to run the heater that kept the camera optics from shattering in the cold. So they turned it off. Pioneer 10 went blind. It continued to fly, spinning in the dark, but it could no longer see where it was going. It relied entirely on its radio connection to Earth to know its orientation. It trusted the math. It trusted the voice from home. The years drifted by like dust. 1979. Pioneer 11, its twin sister, reached Saturn. Pioneer 10 was miles beyond, silent, leading the way into the dark. 1980. Voyager 1 flew past Saturn. Pioneer 10 was still ahead, the leader of the pack, breaking the trail. 1983. A historic moment. On June 13, 1983, Pioneer 10 crossed the orbit of Neptune. At that time, Neptune was the furthest planet from the Sun. This was the boundary, the threshold. For thousands of years, humans believed the solar system ended at Saturn, then Uranus, then Pluto. But Pioneer 10 had now physically traveled beyond the last known marker of the home system. It entered the Kuiper Belt, though humanity didn't call it that yet. It entered the realm of the frozen dwarfs. The space here was empty, clean, and terrifyingly cold. The distance was vast. The distance was now measured not in miles, but in astronomical units. AU. 1 is the distance from Earth to the Sun. Pioneer passed 30 AUI, then 40 AU2, then 50 AU2. The radio signal took longer and longer to reach Earth. At launch, the signal took 0 seconds. At Jupiter, it took 45 minutes. Now, it took 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. The conversation between the ship and the Earth became a slow, rhythmic exchange of monologues. The operator in Spain or California sent a command, "Turn on the Geiger tube." He then waited. He went to lunch. He read a book. He watched the sun set. He came back. 6 hours later, the command reached the ship. The ship obeyed. It sent a confirmation, turning on. 6 hours later, the confirmation reached Earth. 12 hours for a simple hello. The silence between the words was growing. The lag was a physical reminder of the isolation. And yet, despite the cold, despite the blindness, despite the starving battery, the ship continued to do science. It was looking for the edge. The sun breathes. It exhales a wind of charged particles, the solar wind. This wind creates a bubble around our solar system called the heliosphere. Inside this bubble, Earth is protected from the harsh radiation of interstellar space. Pioneer 10 was hunting for the heliopause, the wall where the solar wind stops and the rest of the galaxy begins. Day after day, year after year, its Geiger counters clicked. It measured the cosmic rays. It told the scientists that the bubble was huge, far larger than anyone expected. It taught them that their home was bigger than they thought, but the energy continued to drop. The voltage on the main bus, the central power line, started to fluctuate. If the voltage dropped too low, the main computer would crash. If the computer crashed, the transmitter would drift off frequency. If the transmitter drifted, the ship would be lost forever. The engineers devised a plan. They called it voltage cannibalization. It was a desperate medical procedure performed over a distance of billions of miles. They decided to turn off the heaters for the propellant lines. This was a gamble. Without heaters, the liquid hydrazine fuel might freeze. If it froze, the thrusters wouldn't work. If the thrusters didn't work, the ship couldn't spin. If it couldn't spin, the antenna would drift away from Earth. It was a high-stakes game played in slow motion. They sent the command, "Disable heaters." They waited 12. The telemetry came back. The temperature in the fuel lines dropped, and stabilized just a few degrees above freezing. It survived. The physics of the vacuum acted as a thermos, holding just enough heat to keep the blood of the ship liquid. The power saved by turning off the heater was fed into the radio. The voice stayed strong. The ship was now shivering, freezing, blind and numb, but it was still talking. The 1980s ended. The Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Internet was born. Pioneer 10 missed all of it. It was flying through a void where politics and history did not exist. It only knew the spin, the click of the particle counter, the steady, relentless decay of the plutonium. It reached a distance of 6 billion miles, 7 billion miles. On Earth, the team shrank. The large room of engineers that monitored the Jupiter encounter was gone. Now it was just a handful of dedicated people at NASA Ames, graying men and women who had grown old alongside the robot. They checked in on it periodically. It was no longer a daily mission. It was a checkup on an elderly relative living far away. How is Pioneer today? Still there. Signal is weak, but stable. They began to notice something strange in the data. a mystery. The ship was slowing down more than it should. It was a tiny, tiny amount, a deceleration of mere nanometers per second squared. Was it gravity from an unknown planet? Was it dark matter? Was it a hole in Einstein's theory of relativity? For years, the pioneer anomaly baffled the world's best physicists. Eventually, they realized the answer was poetic. It was the heat. The tiny amount of heat radiating from the warm electronics inside the bus was hitting the back of the high-gain antenna and pushing back against the ship. The ship was pushing itself backward with its own warmth. Even in its dying days, the ship was teaching humanity new physics. The new millennium arrived, the year 2000. Pioneer 10 was now an antique. The technology on board was laughable compared to the smartphone in the operator's pocket. It had 8-bit processors. It had memory measured in bytes, not gigabytes. It used magnetic core memory, tiny iron rings woven with copper wire by hand, and yet it was still functioning. It was a testament to the durability of simplicity. At the end was inevitable. The laws of physics cannot be cheated forever. The plutonium was turning into lead. The heat was fading. The electrical current was becoming a trickle. The voltage was hovering right at the edge of the cliff. By 2002, the signal was so weak that the Deep Space Network needed its largest antennas, the 70-meter dishes in Madrid and Goldstone, just to find it. And even then, they needed advanced chaos theory mathematics to separate the signal from the background noise of the stars. The voice was becoming a whisper. The heartbeat was becoming an arrhythmia. The ship was entering its final winter. The story of the active mission ends not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a switch in the Spanish desert. In the control room of the Robilo Deep Space Communications Complex, the green line on the spectrum analyzer went flat. The distinct rhythmic spike of the Pioneer 10 carrier wave dissolved into the chaotic white noise hiss of the cosmic background. The operator, a man who had spent years listening to the faint whispers of machines billions of miles away, leaned back in his leather chair. The leather creaked in the silence. He rubbed eyes that were red and tired from hours of staring at the glowing phosphors of the screen. He picked up a pen and logged the time in the station's paper logbook. Signal lost. End of transmission. He reached out and turned off the receiver. The hum of the amplifiers died away. Outside the thick concrete walls, in the cool night air, the massive 70-meter dish antenna stopped its slow tracking of the constellation Taurus. The hydraulic pumps disengaged with a low hiss. The great white bowl, which had been straining its mechanical neck to hear a voice from the edge of the solar system, slewed away to find a new, louder, closer target. The vigil was over. On Earth, the accounts were closed. The budget was shelved. The team went home to their families, to their warm beds, to the noisy, chaotic reality of the living world. But in the void, absolutely nothing had changed. This is the most profound truth of the pioneer story, the realization that separates the fleeting nature of human history from the permanence of cosmic history. The end of the signal is not the end of the ship. Sir Isaac Newton's first law of motion is an absolute unforgiving ruler in the interstellar dark. It states that an object in motion will remain in motion unless acted upon by an external force. In the empty, dustless cathedral of interstellar space, there are no external forces. There is no air resistance to slow the ship down. There is no friction to steal its momentum. There is no water to rust its bolts. There is no wind to erode its gold skin. Pioneer 10 does not stop simply because Earth stopped listening. It does not care about fiscal years or attention spans. It is bound only by the laws of ballistics. Let us return to the ship one last time. to witness the slow, agonizing yet peaceful transition from a living machine to an eternal artifact. The moment the plutonium generators finally decayed below the critical threshold, the electrical current inside the ship died. It was not a sudden, dramatic death. There were no sparks. There was no smoke. It was a flickering out, a gentle suffocation, like a candle in a room where the oxygen has been slowly, methodically removed. The voltage on the main bus dropped below the critical 28 volts. The main computer, an 8-bit brain made of simple transistors and magnetic core memory that had hummed with binary logic for 30 years, executed its final cycle. It processed one last zero, one last one, and then nothing. The logic gates, the memory, held in tiny magnetized iron rings, became static. The data froze. The transmitter, the component that had shouted its binary song back to Earth for decades, grew cold. The traveling wave tube amplifier, the voice of the ship, fell silent for the first time since 1972. Then, the cold moved in. The heat faded. The little nuclear fire inside the RTGs that had kept the probe warm against the absolute zero of space turned into embers, then into ash. The thermal equalization began. The universe outside is roughly 2.7 Kelvin, nearly absolute zero. The ship began to surrender its remaining warmth to the void. The aluminum frame contracted. On a molecular level, the atoms of the metal slowed their vibration, settling into a tighter, frozen lattice. The frame groaned silently in the vacuum. The gold foil blankets, once crinkled and flexible, stiffened. They froze into a rigid, permanent sculpture, hard as glass. The liquid hydrazine fuel remaining in the propellant tanks, the chemical meant to steer the ship, froze solid. It turned into blocks of amber-colored ice, expanding slightly against the titanium walls of the tanks. The electrons in the copper wires stopped flowing. They settled into their atomic orbits, no longer pushed by the electromotive force. The hum of the electronics, the vibration of the transformers, the subtle click of the relays. It all stopped. Silence. Absolute, total, physical silence. A silence so deep, so heavy, that it would crush a human ear. Pioneer 10 was still rotating at exactly 4.8 revolutions per minute. It was a giant gyroscope floating in the dark. Because there is no air to brush against it, no friction to steal its energy, it would keep spinning. 10 years from now, it will be spinning. 100 years from now, it will be spinning. 1,000 years from now, it will be spinning. It drifts through the dark, pirouetting like a silent golden dancer. Its dead antenna still pointed faithfully, tragically, back at the tiny yellow star that was its home, waiting for a command that will never come. It is now a ghost ship. It is no longer a creature of science. It has become a piece of debris, but it is noble debris. It is a monument. It is a statue of humanity moving at 27,000 miles per hour. Where is it going? The trajectory of Pioneer 10 is ballistic. It was thrown by the Atlas rocket, kicked by the Centaur stage, and flung by the gravity of Jupiter. It is moving at a speed of 12 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. That sounds fast. To a human, it is unimaginably fast. It is faster than a bullet fired from a rifle. It is fast enough to circle the Earth in less than an hour, but on the scale of the galaxy, it is crawling. It is a speck of dust floating on a stagnant pond. Its destination is the constellation Taurus, the Bull. Specifically, it is heading generally towards the star Aldebaran, the Eye of the Bull. Let us visualize this destination to understand the scale of the journey. Aldebaran is a red giant star. It is old, bloated, and dying. It burns with a cool orange fire 44 times larger than our Sun. If one placed Aldebaran where the Sun is, its surface would extend halfway to the orbit of Mercury. It sits 65 light years away from Earth. To a beam of light, the fastest thing in existence, the journey to Aldebaran takes 65 years. To Pioneer 10, the journey will take 2 million years. Let that number sink in, 2 million years. This is the scale of the long twilight. The narrative is leaving the realm of human history and entering the realm of deep time. Geological time, cosmic time. The clocks of men are useless here. We must use the clocks of stars and stones. Let us settle into the drift and fast forward the universe. Let us watch the epochs pass around the silent ship. 10,000 years. Pioneer 10 has barely moved on the cosmic map. It is still in the suburbs of the solar system, drifting through the Oort cloud, a sparse spherical field of comets that surrounds the sun like a shell. The space here is filled with icy bodies, sleeping comets that have not yet fallen toward the sun. The ship drifts past them in the dark, a metallic intruder among the ice. On Earth, 10,000 years is the entire history of civilization. It is the time from the first city of Jericho to the skyscrapers of New York. In 10,000 years, empires rise and fall. Sumeria, Egypt, Rome, the modern world, all of these are just blips. Cities are built of stone, then glass, then they crumble into dust. Languages change until English is as forgotten as the language of the cave painters. The ice caps melt and reform, but out there in the void, nothing changes. The ship is exactly the same. The gold on the plaque is untarnished. The vacuum preserves it perfectly. There is no oxygen to rust the bolts. There is no wind to erode the metal. It looks exactly as it did the day it left the clean room in Florida. It is a time capsule, frozen in a perfect stasis sleep. 100,000 years pass. Pioneer 10 is still drifting. It has left the Oort cloud and is now truly in interstellar space. The sun is now just a bright star, indistinguishable from the thousands of other stars in the sky. The umbilical cord of light is broken. If an observer were standing on the ship, looking out the window, they would not be able to tell which point of light is home. On Earth, the constellations have changed shape. The stars move slowly in their galactic orbits, drifting like fireflies. The Big Dipper has warped and lost its handle. Orion has lost his belt. The North Star is no longer Polaris. The map of the night sky that the astronauts navigated by is gone. The human species may have evolved. They may have left Earth. They may have destroyed themselves. They may have become something unrecognizable, fused with machines or altered by genetics. But the ship flies on. It is indifferent to the fate of its creators. It remembers humanity only as they were in 1972. It remembers only the man and the woman etched in gold. 500,000 years pass. The ship enters a cloud of the gas is thin, just a few atoms per cubic meter, but at high speeds, over thousands of years, it acts like a gentle rain. Over eons, this gas might slowly pit the surface of the dish antenna. The gold foil might begin to lose its sheen, sandblasted by individual atoms. But the plaque is turned away from the direction of motion. It is bolted to the leeward side of the spacecraft, shielded by the body of the probe. It remains pristine. The drawing of the man and the woman remains clear. The hydrogen map remains legible. The message is safe. 1 million years pass. Pioneer 10 is now halfway to the red eye of the bull. On Earth, the continents are drifting. The slow tectonic engine of the planet is redrawing the map. Africa is colliding with Europe, closing the Mediterranean Sea and pushing up a new mountain range that rivals the Himalayas. The Atlantic Ocean is wider. The Americas are further west. The map of the Earth is being redrawn by geology. The civilization that launched the ship is now as ancient to the future inhabitants of Earth as the dinosaurs are to us. We are a layer of sediment in the rock. We are a strange, brief flash of carbon and plastic in the geological record. But our ambassador is still flying. It is a memory that refuses to fade. 2 million years pass. Pioneer 10 makes its closest approach to Aldebaran. It does not enter the star system. It does not orbit the red giant. Space is too vast for collisions. The odds of hitting a star are like the odds of two dust motes colliding in a cathedral. It simply passes by. It is a silent golden mote of dust drifting through the outer suburbs of the Aldebaran system. Perhaps the star has planets. Perhaps there are eyes there watching the sky. Perhaps they have telescopes powerful enough to see a tiny reflection of sunlight on gold foil. But it is unlikely. The ship passes in the dark, unnoticed. It swings past the red star, bathed for a few centuries in its orange light, warming slightly for the first time in eons, and then continues on into the black. Because Aldebaran is not the end, there is no end. Once it passes Aldebaran, it will continue to orbit the center of the Milky Way galaxy. It will become just another star in the galaxy, a star made of aluminum and gold instead of hydrogen and helium. It will circle the galactic core every 225 million years. This is one galactic year. It will complete one orbit, then another, then another. It will outlive the sun. 5 billion years from now, our sun will run out of fuel. It will destabilize. It will swell into a red giant, expanding its atmosphere. It will swallow Mercury. It will swallow Venus. It will scorch the Earth, boiling the oceans and melting the mountains. The cradle of humanity will be incinerated. The libraries, the hard drives, the monuments of stone, the bones of our ancestors, everything we ever built, everything we ever were, will be vaporized into plasma. The Earth will be gone. The memory of our existence will be wiped from the solar system. But Pioneer 10 will still be there. It will be floating in the cool dark of the outer galaxy, far away from the dying throes of its mother star, intact, frozen, silent. Bolted to its side, the golden plaque will still carry the image of the man and the woman. It will still carry the map of a solar system that no longer exists. It will be the final testament, the tombstone of our species, the only proof that we ever looked up. If, in the incredibly distant future, some intelligence finds it, what will they think? They will catch this glint of gold in their sensors. They will match its velocity. They will bring it on board their ship. They will see the pulsar map and calculate the time. They will realize this object is billions of years old. They will look at the figures and see that the creators were bilateral, that they had hands, that they stood upright. They will see the diagram of the hydrogen atom and know that the creators understood the universe. They will see the diagram of the planets and look for the star that matches the coordinates, only to find a white dwarf cinder where a yellow sun used to be. They will sense perhaps the loneliness of the artifact. They will understand that the creatures who built this were small, fragile, and short-lived, made of water and carbon, but that they had the audacity to touch the infinite. This is the beauty of the Pioneer mission. It was never just about Jupiter. It was never just about radiation belts or magnetic fields or atmospheric data. It was an attempt to cheat death. It was a way to say, we mattered. And in that sense, Pioneer 10 is the most successful machine ever built. It has achieved immortality. So, in the quiet of this night, as the listener lies in the safety of gravity, nestled in a warm bed, let the mind travel to that small golden shape. It is out there right now, at this very second. While the breath is drawn in and released, Pioneer 10 moves another 10 miles. While the pillow is adjusted, it moves another 10 miles. While the eyes close, it moves another 10 miles. It is drifting through a silence so deep it rings. It is surrounded by a darkness so absolute it feels heavy, like a blanket. But it is not lost. It knows exactly where it is going. It is following the laws of Newton, drifting on the smooth, frictionless ice of the space-time continuum. Imagine floating next to it, weightless. The body feels light, released from the pull of the Earth. The stars are all around, above, below, on all sides. A sphere of unblinking diamonds. The ship is rotating. The gold foil glimmers faintly in the starlight, a warm ember in the cold. The big white dish is like a pale moon glowing softly. There is no sound, no wind, no vibration, just the slow, hypnotic spin, round and round, round and round. There is safety here. The cold cannot touch the observer. The time cannot touch the observer. There is only the drift. The problems of the ground are billions of miles away. They are too small. They are invisible from here. Here, there is only peace. There is only the starlight. The operator in Spain has gone home. The lights in the control room are off. The screens are dark. The desert wind blows over the tracks of the antenna, but the signal continues in the form of memory. The ship flies on, into the silence, into the night. Good night, traveler. Good night, pioneer.